The year was 2347, and humanity had only just learned how to travel faster than light. Earth was still a small and quiet world in the eyes of the galaxy. No one out there knew that humans existed. And humans did not know that they were being watched. Commander Lydia Grant was standing on the observation deck of the space station called Horizon's Edge. It floated in orbit around Earth. And from here, she could see the blue planet spinning slowly below. She loved this view. It reminded her why she had joined the space fleet in the first place. Her communicator beeped. She looked down at it and felt her blood turn cold. 12 massive ships had just appeared near Jupiter. They were not human ships. They were enormous, covered in strange symbols, and their weapons were already glowing with power. Lydia ran to the command center. Officers were shouting and screens were flashing red. No one knew what was happening. No one had ever seen ships like these before. Admiral Kevin Shaw was an old man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 40 years in the fleet, and he thought he had seen everything. But when he looked at the footage of those alien ships, he felt something he had not felt in decades. He felt afraid. The transmission came through 10 minutes later. It was from something called the Galactic Council. The message was translated automatically by the alien technology. Every word was clear. The Council was a group of 17 ancient alien species. They had ruled the Milky Way galaxy for 50,000 years. They had laws and traditions older than human civilization itself. And one of their oldest laws was simple. Any young species that survived its own nuclear age must be destroyed before it became a threat. The message was not a warning. It was not a demand for surrender. It was simply a notification. Humanity had been scheduled for extinction. The process would begin immediately. Admiral Shaw listened to the message 3 times. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he finally spoke. He ordered all human ships to defensive positions. He sent warnings to every colony in the solar system. He did everything he could in the few minutes, yet it was not enough. The alien ships moved faster than anything humans had ever built. They struck the mining colonies near Jupiter first. 10,000 people lived on those stations. They had no weapons, no defenses. They were just workers and their families. The stations vanished in balls of fire that could be seen from Earth. Lydia watched from Horizon's Edge. As the distant explosions lit up the darkness of space, she could not speak. She could not move. She just watched as 10,000 people died in an instant. But the Council was not finished. They moved to Mars next. The colony there was larger, with almost 3 million people living under the domed cities. The planetary defense grid fired everything it had at the approaching ships. Missiles and energy beams struck the alien vessels again and again. The Council ships did not even slow down. Their shields absorbed every attack without damage. They fired once, and the largest dome on Mars cracked open like an egg. The air rushed out into space, carrying people and buildings and everything else with it. 1 million people died in less than a minute. On Earth. President Maria Santos watched the destruction from the emergency bunker beneath Washington. She was a small woman with dark hair and sharp eyes. She had been president for only 2 years, and she had never imagined anything like this. Her advisors were panicking. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Some wanted to flee. Some were simply crying. Maria stood up and walked to the window. There was no window in the bunker, of course, but there was a screen that showed the sky above. She looked at the stars and thought about what the Council had said. They wanted to destroy humanity because humans were dangerous. Because humans had survived when they should have died. Because humans might one day become a threat. Maria turned back to her advisors. Her voice was quiet but firm. She said that the Council was right about one thing. Humans were dangerous. And now humanity would show them exactly how dangerous they could be. The United Earth government met in emergency session. Representatives from every nation watched the footage of burning colonies and dying children. They listened to the alien message that spoke of extinction like it was nothing more than paperwork. The vote was unanimous. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not run. Earth would fight. Admiral Shaw received his orders within the hour. He was to organize every military asset humanity possessed. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. Everything would be thrown into this war. Kevin looked at his officers. They were scared, and he did not blame them. The enemy had technology far beyond anything humans had ever seen. Their ships were faster, their weapons were stronger, and they had been fighting wars since before humans learned to make fire. But Kevin had read human history. He knew what his species was capable of when pushed to the edge. He knew about the wars and the struggles and the countless times humanity should have been destroyed but somehow survived. He told his officers that the council had made a mistake. They thought they were attacking a young and weak species. They thought this would be easy. But humans had spent their entire existence fighting against impossible odds. This was nothing new. This was just Tuesday. The first week of the war was a disaster. Human ships were destroyed by the dozens. Colonies fell one after another. The death toll climbed past 10 million, then past 14 million. But something strange began to happen. Human engineers studied the wreckage of a damaged council ship and learned how their shields worked. Human soldiers captured an alien weapon and figured out how to turn it against its makers. Human scientists worked without sleep, driven by rage and grief, looking for any advantage they could find. Lydia Grant volunteered for a mission that everyone said was suicide. She led a small team into enemy territory to rescue survivors from a destroyed station. They should have died. The council ships should have found them and destroyed them. But Lydia was smart and fast and desperate. She flew through asteroid fields and used dead ships as cover. She reached the survivors and brought them home. When she returned, she found that she had become a symbol. People across Earth watched the footage of her rescue mission and felt something other than fear for the first time since. The war began, they felt hope, and in the darkness of space, the Council watched and waited for humanity to break. They had seen this before. Young species always fought at first. They always struggled and raged against their fate, but they always broke in the end. The Council was patient. They had time. They did not know that humanity was already planning something that would change everything. In secret labs and hidden bunkers, scientists were working on weapons and technologies that should have taken centuries to develop. They were working day and night, fueled by coffee and anger and the memory of 14 million dead. The Council thought they knew what war was. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 6 months had passed since the first attack. The Galactic Council expected to find humanity broken and ready to beg for mercy. Their scouts reported that Earth was quiet. Their analysts predicted that internal conflict would tear the humans apart any day now. They were completely wrong. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, in a facility that did not officially exist, Dr. Samuel Park stared at a screen full of numbers. He had not slept in 3 days. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. His eyes burned and his hands were shaking, but he could not look away from what he was seeing. Samuel was a physicist. Before the war, he had spent his life studying theories that most people thought were impossible. Quantum tunneling, faster than light communication, things that existed only in equations and dreams. The government had given him a small budget and left him alone to play with his ideas. Now, the government had given him unlimited resources and told him to turn those ideas into weapons, and he had done it. Technology was called quantum slip. In simple terms, it allowed a ship to disappear from one location and appear in another without traveling through the space in between. There was no warning, no signal, no way to predict where the ship would appear. One moment the space was empty. The next moment, there was a warship ready to fire. Samuel called Admiral Shaw and told him what he had created. There was silence on the other end of the line for almost a full minute. Then Shaw asked how quickly they could install this technology on their ships. 3 months, Samuel said. Maybe 2, if they pushed hard. Shaw told him to push harder, while Samuel worked on his impossible technology. General Patricia Cole was building a new fleet. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. She had commanded troops on 3 continents before the war, and she had never lost a battle. Patricia looked at the old human ships and shook her head. They were designed for exploration and defense. They were beautiful and elegant. They were completely useless for what humanity needed to do now. She ordered new ships to be built. These ships would not be beautiful. They would not explore anything. They would be ugly and brutal and filled with weapons. Every inch of space that could hold a gun would hold a gun. Every system that was not essential for combat would be removed. The engineers were shocked. They said the ships would be inefficient. They said the ships would be ugly. They said no civilized species would build something so aggressive. Patricia smiled and told them that civilization was exactly what they were fighting for. Colonel Nathan Price led a different kind of force. His soldiers did not fly ships or carry heavy weapons. They were small teams trained to slip behind enemy lines, destroy important targets, and vanish before anyone knew they were there. Nathan called them the Ghost Squadrons. The Council called them terrorists. Nathan did not care what the Council called them. His first mission was simple. A Council supply station in the outer solar system was feeding the enemy fleet. Nathan and his team of 12 soldiers approached in a ship so small it did not appear on enemy sensors. They docked with the station in the middle of the night cycle, planted explosives in the reactor core. It left before anyone woke up. The explosion destroyed the station and everything in it. The Council fleet had to wait 3 weeks for new supplies. In those 3 weeks, human forces rescued survivors from 2 destroyed colonies. Nathan considered that a good trade. Lieutenant. Commander Amy Russell was working on something different. She was studying the way the Council fought their wars. She read every report, watched every recording, and talked to every survivor she could find. What she discovered was interesting. The Council had rules. They had traditions. They announced their attacks in advance. They gave enemies time to surrender. They never struck at civilian targets without warning. They fought wars the way humans played chess, with clear rules and predictable moves. Amy wrote a new tactical doctrine. It threw away every rule the Council followed. Human ships would attack without warning. They would strike and run before the enemy could respond. They would hit targets that the Council considered off-limits. They would fight dirty and mean and without mercy. Some officers were uncomfortable with this approach. They said it was dishonorable. They said it made humanity no better than the enemy. Amy told them that 14 million people were dead. She told them that honor was a luxury they could not afford. She told them that winning was the only thing that mattered now. Admiral Shaw approved her doctrine without hesitation. The first major counterattack came exactly 8 months after the war began. A Council supply depot in the Vega system had been operating without any security. Why would they need security? The humans were trapped in their own solar system, licking their wounds and waiting to die. Then 12 human ships appeared out of nowhere. They materialized around the depot like ghosts, their weapons already firing. The depot had no chance to send a distress signal. It had no chance to activate its shields. It simply ceased to exist in a ball of nuclear fire. The human ships vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Hi, Arbiter Zethro was the leader of the Galactic Council. He was ancient even by the standards of his species, with scales that had faded to gray and eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. He had ordered the extinction of 17 young species in his lifetime. None of them had ever fought back like this. He received the report about the Vega depot with something that might have been concern. One attack meant nothing. It was probably a desperate last strike from a dying species. It would not happen again. 3 days later, another depot was destroyed. Then, a communication relay. Then a patrol ship that had stopped to refuel at what it thought was a safe. Location. Zethro called an emergency meeting of the Council. The other species were confused and alarmed. How are the humans doing this? How are they appearing and disappearing without any warning? What kind of technology did they have? No one had answers. The Council had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years, and they had never seen anything like this. On Earth, humanity was finally beginning to feel something other than despair. The news of the counterattacks spread quickly. People gathered in public squares to watch the footage of burning enemy stations. They cheered when they saw Council ships fleeing from human attackers. Samuel Park. watched the celebrations from his laboratory window. He should have been happy. His technology was working. Humanity was fighting back. But all he could think about was the numbers. The Council had thousands of ships. Humanity had hundreds. The Council had trillions of citizens across hundreds of worlds. Humanity had 8 billion people on one planet and a handful of damaged colonies. The war was not over. It had barely begun, and Samuel knew that the hardest battles were still ahead. But for the first time since the war started, he believed that humanity might actually win. The Council had expected humanity to fall apart. Every young species they had ever attacked eventually turned on itself. Old hatreds would rise to the surface. Nations would blame each other for the disaster. Leaders would fight over the remaining resources while their people died. This was the pattern. This was how it always went. This was why the Council always won. But humanity refused to follow the pattern. In Beijing, the largest manufacturing centers on Earth worked around the clock. Factories that once made consumer electronics now produced weapons and ship components. Workers slept in shifts on the factory floor, eating meals at their stations, driven by a fury that needed no explanation. In Berlin, the finest engineers in Europe gathered to solve impossible problems. They took apart captured Council technology and figured out how it worked. They improved it. They made it better. Within months, human shields were nearly as strong as Council shields. In Moscow, Special Forces veterans trained a new generation of soldiers. These soldiers would not fight in normal battles. They would be dropped behind enemy lines to cause chaos and destruction. They would be the nightmares that kept Council commanders awake, and in Washington. Military strategists from a dozen former rival nations sat around the same table. Americans worked alongside Chinese. Russians planned operations with Japanese. Old enemies became allies in the face of extinction. Captain Morrison commanded one of the new Reaper-class battleships. It was called the Vengeance, and it was the ugliest ship Daniel had ever seen. Every surface bristled with weapons. The hull was thick and heavy, designed to absorb punishment that would destroy any Council vessel. It looked less like a ship and more like a fist made of metal. Daniel loved it. His crew came from 37 different nations. Some of them had been enemies just 2 years ago. Now they worked together with a bond stronger than any Daniel had ever seen. They had all lost someone to the Council. They all wanted revenge. The Battle of Proxima Station was the first major fleet engagement of the war. The Council sent 40 warships to crush the human uprising once and for all. They were confident in their victory. They had numbers and experience and technology that humans could barely understand. 40 ships arrived at Proxima Station. 23 ships limped home. Daniel and the Vengeance were at the center of the fight. The Council ships moved in formation, following patterns they had used for thousands of years. They expected the humans to do the same. Instead, the human fleet scattered. Ships attacked from every direction at once. They used asteroids and debris as cover. They fired and vanished and appeared somewhere else. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Commander Lisa Trent flew a cruiser called the Defiant. Halfway through the battle, her ship took a critical hit. The engines were dead. The weapons were failing. The ship was drifting toward the enemy flagship with no way to change course. Lisa made a decision. She ordered her crew to the escape pods. Every single one of them. When the last pod launched, she was alone on the bridge. The Defiant struck the Council flagship at full speed. The explosion was visible from Earth. Lisa ejected 1 second before impact. She floated in the wreckage, watching as 3 Council ships were consumed by the blast from their own flagship. Rescue teams found her 6 hours later, alive and smiling. She became a legend that day. On the ground, the war was just as brutal. Sergeant Marcus Webb led a boarding party onto a Council carrier that had been damaged in the battle. The ship was still dangerous, still filled with enemy soldiers. But it also contained technology and intelligence that humanity desperately needed. Marcus and his team of 20 soldiers entered through a hull breach. The corridors inside were built for species much larger than humans. The ceilings were twice as high as normal. The doors were massive. Everything was wrong and alien. But Marcus realized something. The size of the corridors was a disadvantage for the defenders. The council soldiers were too big to take cover effectively. They could not hide behind corners or duck through small spaces. In the tight corridors of a damaged ship, humans were faster and harder to hit. The battle for the carrier lasted 14 hours. When it was over, 8 of Marcus's soldiers were dead. But the carrier belonged to humanity now. The galaxy began to whisper about humans. Stories spread from system to system, growing stranger with each telling. Some said that humans could not be killed. Some said that humans ate their enemies. Some said that humans were not truly alive at all, but machines built for war. None of these stories were true, but they were useful. Admiral Shaw encouraged the rumors. He wanted the council to be afraid. He wanted them to question every shadow and jump at every sound. Fear was a weapon. Humanity had learned how to use it. High Arbiter Zethriel received reports from the front lines with growing alarm. His commanders were requesting reinforcements. His soldiers were reporting strange behavior from the humans. Some were refusing to continue fighting. One report stood out. A council patrol had cornered a group of human survivors on a destroyed station. The survivors had no weapons, no ships, no way to escape. They should have surrendered. Instead, they charged at the council soldiers with nothing but tools and bare hands. The patrol was destroyed. The humans died too, but they took their enemies with them. Zethriel read this report 3 times. He did not understand. Why would anyone choose death over surrender? What kind of species would throw away their lives for nothing? He began to suspect that the council had made a terrible mistake. They had attacked a species they did not understand. They had awakened something that should have been left sleeping, but it was too late to stop now. The war would continue until one side was destroyed. On Earth, Lydia Grant was promoted to captain. She commanded a new ship called the Relentless. Her crew were all volunteers, people who had lost families to the council and wanted to strike back. Lydia looked at her crew and felt a weight on her shoulders. These people trusted her with their lives. They believed in her. She could not let them down. She gave them a simple promise. She would lead them into battle. She would bring as many of them home as possible. And together, they would make the council pay for every single life they had taken. The crew cheered. And somewhere in the depths of space, the council fleet was waiting. The real war was about to begin. 2 years had passed since the council first attacked Earth. In that time, everything had changed. The council had started this war expecting an easy victory. They had destroyed young species before. It usually took a few months at most. The targets would fight briefly, then surrender, then disappear from history. Simple and clean. Humanity had not followed the script. Instead of surrendering, humans had gotten stronger. Instead of breaking apart, they had united. Instead of dying quietly, they had become the most dangerous enemy the council had ever faced. And now, for the first time in 50,000 years, the council itself was starting to crack. The Telrani were a species of traders and merchants. They had joined the council centuries ago for protection and access to markets. They had voted for humanity's extinction because that was what the other council members wanted. They had not really thought about what it meant. Now they were thinking about it very carefully. The war was costing enormous amounts of money. Trade routes were disrupted. Ships were being pulled from commerce to serve in the military. Profits were falling. And the humans showed no sign of stopping. The Telrani ambassador secretly contacted Earth's diplomatic corps. He said that his people wanted no part of this war anymore. They would withdraw their ships and refuse to help the council. In return, they wanted a promise that humanity would trade with them after the war ended. Ambassador Christopher Lane received this message with careful interest. He was a patient man with a gift for understanding what people really wanted. He knew that the Telrani were not acting out of kindness. They were acting out of self-interest. But that did not matter. What mattered was the crack in the council's unity. Christopher sent back a simple response. Humanity would remember its friends, and it would remember its enemies. The Telrani understood. They began quietly pulling their ships back from the front lines. Admiral Shaw saw the opportunity. The council was weakening. Now was the time to push harder. He gathered his commanders for a meeting. Lydia Grant was there, now one of his most trusted captains. Daniel Morrison, attended by video link from the Vengeance. Nathan Price sat in the corner, silent and watchful. Amy Russell presented the tactical analysis. The plan was ambitious. They called it Operation Reckoning. For 2 years, humanity had been fighting a defensive war. They had struck at supply lines and outposts. They had made the Council bleed. But they had never directly threatened the Council's homeworlds. That was about to change. The target was Varathi Prime. This was the homeworld of the species that had discovered humanity and recommended their extinction. 3 billion Varathi lived there, protected by the strongest planetary shields in the galaxy. No enemy had ever reached Varathi Prime. No enemy had ever dared to try. Humanity dared, Captain. Morrison led the assault fleet. 50 human ships emerged from quantum slip directly above the planet. The Varathi defenders scrambled to respond, but they were too slow. Human weapons had been improved with captured Council technology. They punched through the outer defenses in minutes. The planetary shields held. They were designed to stop anything, and they did their job. But Daniel had not come to destroy the planet. He had come to deliver a message. For 3 hours, human ships hovered above Varathi Prime. They did not fire on the cities below. They did not demand surrender. They simply waited, letting the people below see them. Then Daniel broadcast a message to every screen on the planet. He said that humanity could destroy their world. Right now, right here, they could reduce Varathi Prime to ash and rubble. The shields would fall eventually. Everyone knew that. It was just a matter of time, but humanity was not like the Council. Humans did not believe in extinction. They did not murder entire species for the crime of existing. So the human fleet was leaving. They were going home. And the Varathi should think very carefully about whether they wanted this war to continue. Then the fleet vanished, disappearing back into quantum slip as quickly as they had arrived. Hi. Arbiter Zethriel watched the recording of Daniel's message with a feeling he had never experienced before. It took him several minutes to identify it. It was shame. The Council had attacked humanity without warning. They had murdered millions of innocent people. They had tried to wipe out an entire species simply because they feared what that species might become, and now the humans had. They had the power to take revenge. They had chosen not to use it. Zethriel was ancient and proud, but he was not stupid. He understood what the humans were doing. They were showing the galaxy that the Council was the aggressor. They were proving that humanity was better than their enemies. It was working, the Kreth. Dominion withdrew from the war the next day. They were warriors, proud of their strength and honor. But there was no honor in fighting an enemy who refused to strike at helpless civilians. There was no glory in supporting a cause that had become so obviously wrong. The Mallory Collective followed soon after. They were scientists and philosophers, and they had always been uncomfortable with the doctrine of preemptive extinction. Now they had an excuse to oppose it openly. The Council was falling apart. Species that had stood together for thousands of years were questioning their alliance. Old rivalries were resurfacing. Old doubts were becoming louder. On Earth, people watched the news with growing hope. The enemy was weakening. Victory was becoming possible. But the war was not over yet. Zethriel gathered the remaining loyal Council members. He was desperate now, and desperate people do dangerous things. He proposed a final assault on Earth itself. Everything the Council had left would be thrown at humanity's home world. If Earth fell, the humans would have nothing left to fight for. Some Council members agreed, others refused. The vote was close, closer than any Council vote had been in centuries. In the end, the assault was approved. The Council would gather its remaining fleet and strike at Earth directly. It would be the largest battle in galactic history. Admiral Shaw received intelligence about the coming attack from the Telrani ambassador. He had 2 months to prepare. He looked at the reports and felt the weight of 8 billion lives on his shoulders. If he failed, everyone on Earth would die. His family, his friends, everyone he had ever known, he would not fail. The preparations began immediately. Every ship was recalled. Every weapon was loaded. Every soldier was briefed. Earth itself was transformed into a fortress, with defense platforms and weapon satellites covering every approach. Humanity was ready for the final battle. The Council fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system. On a cold morning in March, 300 warships, the largest force assembled in 10,000 years. They came to end the war once and for all. They came to finish what they had started. Admiral Shaw watched them approach from the command center on Earth. His face was calm, but his heart was pounding. Everything depended on the next few hours. The human fleet was smaller. Only 150 ships stood between the Council and Earth, but every single ship was crewed by people who would rather die than surrender. Every S. Ingalls ship was armed with weapons that the Council had never seen before. The battle began at noon. The Council fleet advanced in perfect formation, just as they had done for thousands of years. Their commanders were confident. They had numbers and experience on their side. This would be difficult, but they would win. They were wrong. The human fleet scattered as soon as the shooting started. Ships darted in every direction, using asteroids and debris as cover. They struck at the Council formation from all sides, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The careful Council formations fell apart as commanders tried to track enemies that would not stay still. Captain Lydia Grant led a squadron of fast attack ships. They targeted the engines of the largest Council vessels, crippling them and leaving them drifting in space. She lost half her ships in the first hour, but she kept fighting. Captain Daniel Morrison brought the vengeance straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. His ship took hit after hit, but it refused to die. The heavy armor that engineers had called wasteful proved its worth, absorbing punishment that would have destroyed any Council ship. Colonel Nathan Price and his Ghost squadrons launched boarding actions against damaged enemy vessels. They captured 3 ships in the first 2 hours. Turning their weapons against their former owners, the battle raged for 6 hours. Both sides took terrible losses. The space around Earth became a graveyard of broken ships and floating bodies. And then, finally, the Council fleet broke. It started with a single ship turning to flee, then another, then a dozen. Within minutes, the entire Council formation was in retreat, the ships jumping too faster than light speed and vanishing into the darkness. The humans did not pursue. They were too exhausted, too damaged. But they had won. On Earth, people poured into the streets. They hugged strangers and cried with joy. After 2 years of fear and death, the nightmare was finally over. But Admiral Shaw knew that winning a battle was not the same as winning a war. The Council still existed. They still had ships and soldiers and worlds. If humanity wanted true peace, they would need more than military victory. They would need the Council to admit defeat. The negotiations took place on a space station in the Tau Ceti system. It was neutral ground, far from Earth and far from any Council world. The station had been built specifically for this meeting, and it would probably be abandoned as soon as the talks were over. President Maria Santos led the human delegation. She had aged a decade in the past 2 years. There were lines on her face that had not been there before, and her hair had gone gray at the temples. But her eyes were still sharp. Her voice was still strong. Across the table sat High Arbiters Ethrel and the remaining Council representatives. They looked defeated. Some of them could not even meet the eyes of the humans they had tried to destroy. Maria presented her terms. They were not negotiable. First, humanity would be recognized as a sovereign power with full rights in the galaxy. No one would ever threaten Earth again. Second, the Council would pay reparations for the 14 million people killed in the initial attacks. The money would go to the families of the victims and to rebuilding the destroyed colonies. Third, the doctrine of preemptive extinction would be abolished forever. No species would ever again be destroyed simply for existing. The Council representatives listened in silence. They had expected harsh terms, These were harsh terms, but they were not impossible. Then Maria added one more demand. This was the one that truly mattered. She wanted the Council to publicly acknowledge that their attack on humanity had been wrong. Not just a strategic mistake. A moral failure. She wanted them to admit before the entire galaxy that they had tried to commit genocide and that they had failed. Zethral's scales turned pale. This was humiliation beyond anything his species had ever experienced. The Council had never apologized to anyone. They had never admitted wrongdoing. To do so now would shatter their reputation forever. He looked at Maria and saw no room for compromise. She would accept nothing less. The document was signed the next day. Zethral's hands trembled as he wrote his name. The other council representatives followed, one by one. The broadcast went out to every world in the galaxy. Trillions of beings watched as the most powerful organization in known space admitted that they had been wrong, that they had tried to destroy an innocent species, that they had failed. 5 years later, the galaxy was a very different place. Humanity held a permanent seat on the newly reformed Galactic Assembly. The old council was gone, replaced by a more democratic organization where every species had a voice. The doctrine of preemptive extinction was not just abolished but actively condemned. Dr. Samuel Park's quantum slip technology had been shared with trusted allies. Species that had lived in fear of the Council for millennia suddenly had the means to defend themselves. The balance of power shifted permanently. Admiral Shaw retired to a small house on Mars. He spent his days gardening and reading and trying to forget the things he had seen. Sometimes young officers came to visit, hoping to learn from his experience. He always welcomed them, though the conversations often left him tired. Captain Lydia Grant took command of Earth's first exploration fleet. Her mission was simple: find new worlds, make new friends, and ensure that humanity would never be caught off guard again. She was 43 years old, and she felt like her life was just beginning. Captain Daniel Morrison became an admiral himself. He oversaw the construction of a new class of ships, vessels designed for peace rather than war. They were beautiful, with graceful lines and elegant proportions. Daniel sometimes missed the ugly brutality of the Vengeance. But he was glad that such ships were no longer needed. Ambassador Christopher Lane spent years traveling from world to world, building relationships and negotiating treaties. The Telrani became humanity's closest trading partners. The Kreth Dominion sent warriors to train with human soldiers. Even some Varathi, ashamed of their species' role in starting the war, reached out to make amends. And the 14 million? Their names were carved into a wall of crystal on Earth, stretching for miles across a valley that had once held a major city. Every year, on the anniversary of the first attack, millions of people gathered there to remember. President Santos retired after her third term. In her final speech, she spoke about what humanity had learned from the war. She said that strength was important, but mercy was more important still. She said that humanity had proven itself worthy of survival by choosing not to become the monsters they had fought. High Arbiter Zethral lived for another century after the war. He spent those years in seclusion, refusing to speak to anyone about what had happened. Some said he died of shame. Others said he simply could not bear to see the new galaxy that had risen from the ashes of his council. The truth was simpler. He died knowing that he had been wrong about humanity. He died knowing that the greatest mistake of his long life was thinking that a young species could not possibly be as strong as an old one. Humanity had proven him wrong, and the galaxy would never forget it.